Hello, welcome to Beastly Theories. I'm your host, MCGRATH, and today we have a very special guest that needs very little introduction. It's James BOBO FAY from Finding Bigfoot. How are you, Bobo? What's going on?
Good, Andy. I'm good, man. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. Listen, I'm happy that you've joined us here today. Now, we do have a bit of a time differential going on. I'm on 10 o'clock, and I think you're on 3. Is it 3 now?
3 in the afternoon for me.
Okay, so it's bright and breezy for you. That's good. Now, we haven't known each other long, but as a fan of Finding Bigfoot, it does feel as if I've known you for a while. And my opening question for you really is, how do you reconcile things like that? How do you reconcile getting to know people, fans and folks alike, who feel like they know you from TV? Does it complicate the communication, or do you have some tried and trusted techniques to bridge the gap between TV Bobo and the real guy?
I wouldn't have any techniques. I mean, I totally get it because I'm the same way. Like, I've met people that I've watched on TV for years, and like first name basis with them. You're talking to them like you know them, and they have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
So I've been on both ends, and like Cliff says, if they're a fan of me, there's something wrong with them. But no, it's cool. Like I totally get it. Yeah, I understand. They do know you just don't know them yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they've got a picture of you somehow, elements of your personality, but
Right.
it's hard to bridge a starting relationship with somebody you know but haven't met, right? So it always kind of intrigued me. How do these guys who've had a big media presence for a long time, how do they deal with that, or how do they put the people at ease that they're meeting? I'm sure we're not talking starstruck so much, but just this familiarity without knowledge. It's a strange situation.
Yeah. I guess I'm a little more standoffish, kind of. Maybe not standoffish, but just uh, how do I want to put it? You're gonna edit this, right? And take out the long pauses and ums and ahs.
No, no, I keep it all in. I keep it all in.
Uh,
That's the non-TV Bobo. That's what we want.
okay. I forgot what was the question again?
Just how do you
Oh, do I have
deal
any
with
techniques?
those folks that are, yeah, that they feel like they know you, but they don't have the relationship.
I usually, okay, if we're like at a Bigfoot conference or something like that, or any kind of public gathering where like
Uh-huh.
we're featured, I'll just say, well, who are you? Because they'll start talking to me like without introducing themselves,
Uh-huh.
like almost always, like because they think like we know each other. And I'm like,
Uh-huh.
first off, you got to tell me who you are. Like, who are you? Where you're from? I like to know a little bit about them when we start talking.
I think that's good. I think that's good. Just to get in close and personal, at least you take the familiarity back from them, right? I mean, that seems to make sense to me. Now, um, obviously, moving past the TV side of things, you've had lots of jobs. It talks about different jobs that you took in your bio to sort of get near to Bigfoot locales or where you thought Bigfoot might be. So, and tell us a little bit about these jobs, and do you look back now and see any of these ad hoc careers as a preparatory stage for your TV career? Something that really set you up for what you ended up doing?
Um, Kind of be as far as helping a TV crew. I mean, helping to see a Bigfoot and helping a TV crew are kind of different jobs. When I did like some roadie stuff for bands or whatever, or like security, from that it wasn't the intent, but I met a lot of people that in the entertainment industry, and people kind of move around and work in, they might work in music for a while, then work in television or film for a while. So through those contacts, um, I was living up in Humboldt, Northern California, and a couple of TV shows came up to film, and they were looking for Bluff Creek, where the Patterson Gimlin film was, and I was like one of the only guys around here that knew where it was. So like they hired me to come down and like be a unit producer or local fixer,
Uh-huh.
and I would help out that way. And then they'd always be like, "Man, you should be working in front of the camera, not behind." And I'd say, "Well, it's not the goal." the reason I wanted to do TV eventually was to get good equipment. I figured, man, we could get thermal imagers and have a budget to be out there, and which happened, but I didn't factor in the part about making a crappy TV show, taking up so much time of getting in the way of using those thermals and trying to film a Bigfoot.
Yeah, I guess there was a lot of, I mean, just looking at the equipment that you guys had to take out in order to place yourselves on camera, those big units that you used to wear, it seems like it was a heavy load to bear while searching for, quite an elusive creature.
Oh, the camera backpack sucked. Those things just, I couldn't stand them. I mean, no one liked them, but I really hated them. They just, there's this big arm sticking down in front of you that hooks everything. So we just stayed on. Otherwise, I'd be off trail. Like if I'm not on camera wearing one of those packs and I can do what I want, like I'll go off trail a lot more, or deer trails, game trails, and not stick to just basically fire roads or really maintained trails, because A, it's hard to see if you're using a thermal because it blinds you, and then B, that big hook in front, if there's any kind of brush hanging out in the way, it'll pull a branch back and then it releases and it comes slaps you in the face, that sort of stuff. But I get they wanted the reaction. They want the facial. People want to see that face reaction when something happens.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it was clearly from a viewing point of view, was quite necessary, because we're just seeing your faces. But for you, the guys out there doing it, it must be quite difficult. I mean, it really leads on to my next question, which was the show. For all of the different types of opinions about it, it really didn't reinvigorate commercial cryptozoology worldwide. And it did show people that there were other people out there wanted to know about sightings of Bigfoot and unknown animals. So how do you feel about the legacy of the show? And were there ever any points when you thought like it wouldn't come off?
Oh, it almost fell apart the first pilot. It does have a legacy for sure. And it did have a role in, as you said, reinvigorating cryptozoology and especially Bigfoot. Because I always said once they discover Bigfoot, it's going to open the world of cryptozoology up to all sorts of other cryptids. But I'm not sure that Bigfoot will be the first thing discovered. I mean, there's the river serpents and the sea monsters, whatever. Yeah. Which seem to be the same. As far as I can tell, they're the same thing. They're the river and lake serpents and sea serpents are the same ones, because these lakes and rivers that have the sightings are connected to the ocean with large, viable salmon runs, and salmon breed up in fresh water. They go up the rivers and creeks and then breed and then come back down and die. And so these sea serpents, lake serpents, whatever you want to call them, the Native Americans here on the Pacific Northwest, they've all told me they come in with they show up when the salmon show up. They follow the salmon up and they're feeding on salmon. And I guess it was the same thing with Loch Ness. Like, you know that more about this than me. Like Loch Ness
definitely.
They got that new dam, and then once the new dam got put in, the Nessie sightings just tailed off.
I mean, they seem to pick up and they go away. Last year was very, very busy. At 13 alleged sightings when I investigated just at the end of December, which had a pretty decent photograph to go with it. And of course, there's salmon runs and eel runs and trout all the time. It has like a year-round supply. So, but there are points where it's busier than at other points. And definitely, I actually figured out with Loch Ness, I did a sampling of 16 years. When there was a lot of rainfall, there were less salmon numbers, and when there were less salmon numbers, there were less Nessie sightings, because the rain sort of drives away the insect production, and the fish eat the insects, and if there's not enough insects, there's less fish. So I made that kind of correlation over 16 years, and every year that had a smaller amount of rainfall and more salmon, more insects and more salmon, there were more Nessie sightings. So it seemed to definitely have some sort of correlation, but again, it's all conjecture until we find one. Yeah.
Right. Well, the tribes up here, when I was up in Washington State on the Quinault Reservation, I was up there. This was about 20 years ago. I was up there looking into Bigfoot stuff, Now they'd say, well, yeah, they're here, but right now we're dealing with the serpents. They're like, what do you mean? They told me about it, and I was like, really? And they went behind the fish processing plant. It's just a small building, and for the local tribe, and they showed me these nets. Had these big gill nets. They stretch across the river, and the salmon swim in, and they get stuck by their gills. Well, they had these holes, about, I don't know, 2-3 feet tall and like 1.5 2 foot wide. They said, yeah, that those were all salmon that were eaten out by the serpent.
Wow.
These guys are poor. They're not chopping up $1,500 nets and piling them up behind in the hopes that someday some white guy's going to come by asking about Bigfoot and they can show them these serpent. And I was picking them up and looking. I was a commercial fisherman, so I know about nets. And they said, yeah, that's why you'll never catch one. When you catch one on a rod and reel, it just snaps it right. They got really sharp teeth, and they're eels, so they can slide, and they're very flexible. And they said they can eat their way out of any net or snap any type of fishing line, even like a steel leader. They'll just snap it off.
Oh yeah, I mean, average size in Loch Ness is between 20 and 40 feet, so it's a very large creature, very, very, very large. I mean, at the moment, talking about sea serpents and other things, there are a lot of different cryptid sightings, not just of Bigfoot, but other things that become popular, like the Mothman, like Dogman. Whilst the whole Finding Bigfoot has taken place, and do you think that Bigfoot has taken a bit of a backseat now to some of these newer phenomena that people have become interested in, like Mothman? Like I hear that's very popular with very young people, or Dogman. It seems to be even over here in England, a big surge in interest in this Dogman phenomenon.
Well, I'm one of those people that's been caught up in the Dogman phenomena. I mean, I've been looking into it for several years now, but I really got into it the last couple of years. Then, especially last year, or I guess it's been 2 years now. Yeah, 2 years. My booking agent, who Lee Kirkland, from Creepy People Management, that runs CryptidCon in Kentucky, where I met you actually.
Yeah. I've met Lee. Nice guy.
He saw Dogman when he was 18 years old, walk 50 feet in front of his car in high beam lights.
Wow.
Just lumber across the road. Then he was the first guy that I knew personally, and I've done business with, and known to be a upstanding, cool, sane person. And he, he's the first guy I talked to that I knew and on a personal level that I felt I could really trust and know he's not crazy. Tell me he saw one up close. I mean, I've heard a lot of secondhand stories from people that the person they were talking to was real credible, but I didn't, I might have met him once but when I heard that, I was like, wow, because we used to hear all these things, and I gotta apologize to witnesses that I've talked to in the past that told me it had a large snout and big pointy ears on top and big fangs and a muzzle. I'd be like, well, you're mistaken a Bigfoot for whatever you're calling it. Because back then, before the name Dogman came out, people would say werewolves.
Yeah, same here.
And I don't think there's any I mean, I don't know. Maybe it seems like there is a difference and not a difference. A lot of people say like the werewolf is human sized. I guess is usually human sized. With these Dogmen, I mean, I'm getting reports of them up to 10 foot tall.
I've heard that too. Have you heard about variations in the type of anatomical presentation as well? Some said to have wolf-like legs, although they're standing up on their back, their hind legs, and others was more of a humanoid physique. Have you heard those two differentiations as well in North America?
Yeah, and I'm diving deeper into that myself. Because I used to always think, well, under stress and low light conditions, it could be the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And just different descriptions, or it's perception, everything's perception.
I think so too. I think, sorry to interrupt you there, but I think sometimes people who don't recognize what they're seeing, they reach into their mental library of what they do know and pick out something that kind of is similar to it. You hear that with Nessie all the time. I had like a sheep-like head or a camel-like head or a seal-like head, and they don't really mean that. That's just all they can sort of pick out of their mental library to describe what they're looking at. And do you think that could be the case with the Dogman, or is it really that different to Bigfoot in its presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is a Dogman type phenomena happening, and it's definitely picking up steam. But when I was working on Mysterious Encounters back in 2003, there was the reports for Dogman were piling in, and even back then, and when Mysterious Encounters went to Minnesota, Michigan, up in that Wisconsin, there was more Dogman reports than Bigfoot. But we thought it was all just people lying, or more likely just mistook a Bigfoot for a Dogman. But now looking back on it, it was like, because we'd say like a real kind of condescending tone, or not like, I mean, our thought process would be like, you poor mistaken person. It was a Bigfoot, you know. And the people that don't believe in any of this stuff, it just all seemed extra crazy. Like, oh, the Bigfoot guys are poo-pooing the Dogman guys. But and then I thought it was all new, but digging into it more, there's historical accounts for Dogman.
Of course, and then you go back to the werewolf legends, and they're very similar.
Right, but as a werewolf, you have to be bit by one to become one, or something like that.
I mean, that's the problem with researching it here, and in my particular book, that's why I was trying to focus on recent sightings, not historical or ancient sightings, so to speak. Is it's so mixed up with folklore, mythology, and the supernatural in the way people present it. It's hard to pick those original sightings out of mythology. You know, something has happened in the local population. They've talked about it, and they've obviously, coming from a religious mindset back in those times, they've placed a supernatural essence onto it. And I think that's something that we do because of our worldview, you know.
Right.
If we were to find a Bigfoot now, you know, if you think of the creationist and the materialist, a materialist would say, look, a missing link. And the creationist would say, look, it's a monkey, so there is no missing link. And the worldview would immediately, classify that for those people, and nothing would sway them. So I think it's the same with this Dogman phenomenon. I did write about it. I wrote a blog called Dogman Rebranding the Werewolf. You know, so I was kind of embarrassed to say werewolf now. If you say Dogman, we can make it a creature again, which I think it is, just some kind of creature, but I don't know what.
That's funny. I mean, when you really think about it, Dogman's like legitimizing the word werewolf. You know what I mean? Like
it is.
It just sounds crazy. And I don't think there's anything like a Bigfoot's man-ish. Like, it's a hominin. Whereas Dogman, I don't think there's anything man-like about it, except it's on two legs most of the time. But then you start talking about all the different types, like type 4s. Then I've heard type 7, type 8.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's kind of. Then it's like, well, how many subspecies could be undiscovered? You know, it's like.
Yeah, it seems strange, really. I mean, with Bigfoot around the world, I would think for different types, you know, like the orang pendek or the almas or the Sasquatch. Well, okay, I'd think of that like bears, polar bear, you know, brown bear, black bear, moon bear, panda, all bears, very distinctively bears, even though they have different presentations. That's understandable to me.
Right.
But the Dogman thing, it was the one thing when somebody first told me about it, Dogman, that made me understand how people feel when I talk to them about Bigfoot.
Right.
I was like, oh, you sound a bit crazy, and I don't really feel comfortable with this. And then I thought, okay, well, you know, it's a big ask, but you make big asks of people every day when you're presenting this anecdotal evidence, Andy. So consider it. And I've considered it. And there doesn't seem to be anything different about the reports these Dogman witnesses make, other than I find it hard to believe. Nothing different from the Bigfoot reports. I mean, in their sincerity, just it's difficult for me to accept. So I've got to kind of examine my own prejudice with that, really.
Right. And then it's just, there's so many rabbit holes you can dive down. And, you know, I'm still figuring out who's who in the Dogman world, and, you know, who's a good source. And there's one guy, I can't believe I just forgot his name, but he's done excellent research. I heard him on Crypto PTSD. I just started listening to podcasts this year. I never listened to him before that, and because I guess because the first couple I heard were people that didn't know what they were talking about. I'm like, well, why am I going to listen? And I was thinking, I can't learn anything from these people because it was Bigfoot stuff, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I know all the players really in the Bigfoot world, like, you know, the main guys. And I have personal contact with. I could call them up and ask them questions. So then I'd be like, who are these other guys, you know, that are making these bold claims and have these crazy stories? But yeah, I've been diving into well, I know one name I know from Dogman. You probably know more about this. Is I heard some of his stuff. And he seems like he knows what he's talking about. Is Vic Cundiff?
That's who I was thinking of. Exactly that person. I listened to a whole bunch of his podcasts, and just with an open mind, because I didn't know what to make of it. I've included it in my own book, Beasts of Britain, because there are sightings here, so I had to cover them. They're recent sightings, but again, you know, apart from the Cundiff or reading Linda Godfrey's books, you know, somebody like Linda, then you know that kind of is as much as I know about it, apart from the folklore. And I'm in the dark about the rest. You know, we don't really have, you know, a whole catalogue of footprints and things like you have with Bigfoot and hares and viable. There's not really even any viable. There's no Patterson Gimlin type footage with Dogman, is there?
Dude, that's the thing. If these things are a biological evolved, you know, they've always been here, there'd be way more evidence. That's why I think there's a definite paranormal aspect of these things. And then, you know, I've got notes to fill out on this. I've been wanting to look into it, but I know in the Bible, like in those prophecies of the apocalypse and all that, they talk about at the end times, all manner of strange beasts will start, magical beasts will start appearing, you know. And with what's going on in the world, the end times seems plausible.
Yeah.
So they could, maybe they are just, oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's cool.
Neighbor's dog and the parakeet that's going.
Oh, is that the noise?
Yeah. But as far as the Dogman, yeah, I mean, like, people talk about finding these giant, like 8, 12-inch canine footprints walking bipedally. And like, I'd love to see some casts of that, you know, and which also brings me back to the Bigfoot thing when people talk about all the different types of Bigfoots. Well, I mean, Dr. Meldrum, who I respect to the highest degree, you know, I've spoke to him a lot. He's a buddy, you know, I've hung out with him a lot.
He's a very nice guy. Yeah,
and he's so smart, and you know, he really knows footprint morphology, and he has not seen any viable tracks that aren't 5-toed, the same characteristics. It's the same species, you know. You're talking about a Bigfoot, and then, you know, you hear these guys talking about, well, these dudes are government agents, and they talk about all the government has all these different kinds of Bigfoots. Dogman's listed, but
I'm always very wary of that kind of stuff. You know, I think they give the government so much more credit than they deserve for secret activity. You know, I think they've got better things to be doing than hiding strange creatures from us.
Well, and also, like, I know guys that work in those. Like, I know some kind of high up people in those worlds, and they all say they don't know anything about that stuff. You know, like, a really good friend of mine's good friends with General David Petraeus, who oversaw all special forces.
Okay.
And he had talked to him about Bigfoot, you know, a few times, and you know, he didn't have some like secret knowledge or. And then my really good friend, his dad's best friends with Leon Panetta, who's the former director of the CIA over here, and they have dinner and stuff like that. And he hasn't had a chance to talk to him like privately yet, but he said, you know, he's really gonna try to get digging into him. So, I mean, there's people at the highest level that seems like there'd be more stuff slipping out than just.
I would think so.
Yeah,
I think it's like what do you call it? Clickbait, that kind of headline.
Right.
Government knows, government cover up. I mean, you can, when it comes to cover up and conspiracy, and I believe there are conspiracies out there, just that we give them too much credit you know, for being involved in all kinds of conspiracies. There's a big cat phenomenon here in Britain, for example, and
Right.
it's easy to trace it back to the 1970s when we brought in a law called the Dangerous Wild Animals Act. I've spoken to people who let them go. I know a lot of zoos when they had escaped animals like pumas and melanistic leopards, maybe panthers. They just didn't say anything. Let them go. They thought that would be that. Now we have thousands of sightings nationwide. Now, the way the British government deals with that is they just don't comment. They don't hide it. They don't cover it up. They don't go to any lengths when there's a sighting, when there's something makes the tabloid papers. It's even better for them because then, you know, people dismiss the tabloids and they just don't say anything. That's the best kind of cover up you can have. Dismissiveness.
Right.
You know, and I think most governments are like that, like, well, yeah, you know, we're not really dealing with that, so we'll leave it to you conspiracy guys to figure it out, and everybody else will think you're nuts. That's just how it works. I wanted to talk about your sighting actually, because I watching the Finding Bigfoot program over the years, and just as an aside, actually, I told Cliff this when he was on, that you actually kept me company on my 6:30 a.m. morning commute to London for quite a few years, because, you know, I was walking in, I was bored, and I just popped the Finding Bigfoot thing on. It was a nice little guide in. But what I didn't know from the show was that you had a sighting in 2001.
Yeah, that was my first one.
Now, could you tell us about that one, to sort of describe the scene, the place, what it looked like, and maybe add a few of the others on top?
Okay, it takes a little bit of. You got a few minutes?
Yeah, I've got quite a few minutes.
Okay. I've told this story a ton of times, so if someone's heard this a bunch of times, I can fast forward, I guess. But I had a friend, John Freitas, who I actually had never met in person. We just contacted each other. I contacted him over email. He was in the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the biggest paper in Northern California. And they had a couple articles on him in there, like back in '96 and '98. So I actually got an email just to contact him. So that's when I got my first email account. And so we'd corresponded a little bit. And we were going to try to hook up. Whenever he was doing like his little expeditions, like weekend trips and stuff into the mountains, I was commercial fishing, so I just would never. I have a lot. I'd have, you know, I'd work a lot through like certain seasons, and then I'd have like, you know, a month off or 2 months off between, you know, say crab and shrimp or whatever, salmon. So anyways, I was talking to him one day, and I was out in the mountains, and this is back in 2001 when cell phones were really junk up here. Like the reception was terrible. And I was talking to him, and I heard him say there had been a sighting, and I was like, a Bigfoot sighting. And it was an area that I was very familiar with, up behind Redwood National Park in the Bald Hills on Johnson Road. And I was like, oh my God, I know that area so well. I've logged up in there. I've gone squatching there tons of times. I got friends that live out there. And I'm like, and he started describing the place. I knew exactly I knew exactly where he meant. And I was like, oh my God, I got to get up there. And my buddy had a Gen 2 Ukrainian night scope. Well, this is what led up to the sighting. My first, for sure, where I knew for sure it was a Bigfoot encounter, led into 5 days later. I think I'm almost positive seeing the same one 5 nights later with my buddy. So I had this encounter 5 nights before, but when that was on the 21st, May 21st, 2001, I was doing calls. Before I blew my vocal cords out, I used to do the loudest Bigfoot calls anyone's ever heard. I could nail them too. I could really sound like one. But I'd never heard one, but I just naturally did that call. And I was doing these calls and roaring, and I was way far from the river, but you could the Klamath River, and I was due west of the Patterson Film Site pretty much. And I could maybe a little southwest, but west of there, across the river, and it was echoing all the way down to the Klamath, which was a few miles away. And I was like, man, my calls were really carrying. And the story I got was that at this point, earlier that day, the day before, this Indian woman had been driving down to the village down there at the end of the road, and a Bigfoot walks across the road in front of her, and she thought it was a female maybe, and it was carrying a rolled up piece of cardboard, like into a tube shape. It was rolled up like a tube, and then it also had like a blue child sweater it was dragging with its other hand, and it walked right in front of her and just walked off into the woods. And I was like, oh my God, I gotta get up there. And I brought my buddy's night scope, and it was my first night having real night vision, and it was a piece of garbage, you know. It was looking back on it. I mean, it worked enough to see a little bit, but I was excited because it was the best thing I'd ever used. And I went up there and I was doing my calls and this and that, and I started hearing this. I thought it was a wolf hybrid howling north of me. And the road, I'm on a coastal ridge line, so it runs due north-south. And to the west, on the top of that ridge line, is the boundary for Redwood National Park. So at the top of the ridge are these 300-foot old-growth redwoods, and then 2 feet away, it started into a clear cut. So I was in this clear cut up there. God, I just mixed it up. I jumped ahead of the sighting location. Anyways.
No, that's cool.
So when I went back the next night. I had this crazy encounter. I'll tell that some other time, I guess. But I had a crazy encounter. It's still the gnarliest thing that's ever happened to me. And if I would have had audio recording running at this, it would it'd be right up there with Sierra Sounds.
Wow.
I think it was for a variety of sounds. I honestly think it was better than the Sierra Sounds as far as like not talking, because I didn't really hear much talking. It was more just crazy animalistic roars and howls and flapping lips and giant exhales and stomping.
Like close, very close.
Well, I'd say it was all within 70 yards.
That's close.
Yeah, and the closest maybe 45, 50 yards, but when I first heard the calling come, because it took it 45 minutes to get down from when I first heard it to come down to where I was. So I knew it was a few miles north. So I went back the next night, and after having the living daylight scared out of me, like the most scared I ever was in my life, I went back the next night, and that was freaky for sure, going back to the same spot.
And you're alone now. You're by yourself, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Because I didn't have anyone to go with back then. I'd ask people to go, and people always said they wanted to go, but almost no one would go. There was a couple guys that would go with me once in a while, but for the most part, it was always just me alone. Which now I mean, I still go out alone, but I way prefer going with someone. It's more fun, and B, a lot of times I'm not sure exactly what I heard, so I want someone there to verify what I heard or direction. Because I've noticed a lot of times my sense of direction for audio, like where the sound came from, like I'll be off, like sometimes like 180 degrees. Like, didn't it come that way? And Cliff will be like, no, it came from that way. And I'll be like, what? You know?
Cliff's got those musicians' ears.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, God, I'm kind of bad when I'll get wandering all over the place. So for my sighting, so we went, so nothing happened my second night out. Like, and I was out there all night. And man, I got to say, that was one of the scariest times of my life, being out in that same meadow where I just had the living daylight scared out of me the night before, to be out there again, like banging on trees. But, I had the vibe that nothing was going to happen, that they weren't around, and nothing did happen. So then when John Freitas and a couple of this other cop and then another guy, Manny, came up there 5 nights later, I said, well, there's nothing here. Because I went back to not just one night. I went back to the same spot probably 3 nights out of the next 4. But on the 5th night, those guys came. I said, hey, well, it started north. Let's go up there. So we went up. We found a great spot to set up the call blaster, the big speaker, and play sounds, and went right over the river. And there was a clear cut on both sides of the road. Because the ridge line, we were on the east side of the ridge line as a north-south running ridge. And about 200 yards up was the park boundary line where the old growth redwoods were at the peak of the summit. And then dropping down below was clear cut for another 100 and something yards, 150 yards to
that's a good spot.
Yeah, to a cliff, and it dropped off like about 2,000 foot down to the Klamath River. So we went up there and I said, yes, this sounds about right for how far it was from where it was 4 miles down the road or something. I said, this is about where it sounds like it came from. So we set up, and then right when we started, we get this loud, just definite squatch scream come from down in the river valley.
Wow.
And then not long after that, John was he was kind of a big name in the Bigfoot world then. You know, it was a much smaller place where everyone really knew everyone back then. And he'd been in the papers and on television for it, so he was kind of a known guy. And he was doing the Jeff Rents. Remember Jeff Rents on that show Sightings, the radio show Sightings?
No, I don't remember that.
It was at that point, it was like the 7th biggest radio broadcast in the world. And he was kind of like the poor man's Art Bell. And I think he had like 9 million live listeners or something like that.
That's pretty decent.
yeah. I mean, he was big time. And John was doing a live remote broadcast. And I don't know I think they had sent him a bag phone, like the old cell phone bag phone. Remember, like it was like a little shoebox with a big cell phone inside it. And he had one of those, and he was in a convertible, and he was on that main road, the dirt logging road, Johnson's Road, and he was driving really slow, trying to get into a sweet spot where the reception he was trying to get 2 bars. So he found a spot. He stopped right next to our trucks. And let me paint the picture for you. When you're driving north on this road and you're coming into the clear cut, you're driving in on your your right hand side, which is going downhill to the river. Okay. It's all pecker poles, like just regrowth, like it had been clear cut not too long before, like maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 years before, something like that. 10 years. It was, it's just little pecker poles, like little 4 or 6 inch trees. And in diameter, and on the left side it was clear cut all the way up to the park boundary, which is like another 150, 200 yards up there, something like that. And so as you drive in, you got about a 50-yard stretch of pecker poles on your right, clear cut on your left, and then the pecker poles stop, and you go into all clear cut on both sides for another 70, 80 yards, something like that, 100 yards. And in that, there was a strip of old trees that were kind of went through the middle of the clear cut, like at an angle, cut across like a 45-degree angle or so, going up to the next patch of trees. And that turned out to be, it was a historical site. It was the old Hoopa Indian trail from the valley to the coast, which had been being used for, some estimates are 30,000 years. That was the way they traveled to the coast to trade with the coastal Indians from the Indians from the valley.
Okay.
And they're not allowed to cut it. So John started hearing, so he started driving back down south, and he drove next to, and our trucks, my friend was parked right on the corner of those pecker poles, like where the clear cut started. So we were parked, we had both our cars parked up there, and we set up a little fire, and we cooked some abalone. He'd got some abalone that day from diving down in Trinidad. So we cooked some abalone, put the smell out there, and we wrapped the abalone in some tinfoil, and I put it on the roof of my truck because I didn't want a bear, because there's so many bears out there, and I've had stuff thrashed by the bears. So I put it on top so the bears wouldn't get inside the truck. And I also thought, well, if a Bigfoot comes, they can try to grab it. And John stopped next to our car. We had 2 Toyota trucks parked there along the side of the road on the east side of the road. And he goes, all of a sudden he starts going, "Man, I'm getting growled at." I'm like, really? And he goes, "Yeah, there's a bear and it's stomping its feet at me." And he goes, "Man, it's a big bear and it's got an aggressive growl." And then we're like listening, and we're looking down the. What happened was, I skipped this part of the story, was I'd forgotten, in my haste and excitement, I'd forgotten that night scope on my front porch when I went up there. So I called my buddy EH and said, "EH, hey," because I knew he was going to go surfing up north, and he had to drive it was still like 45 minutes out of the way, but I was like, "Hey man, can you bring that night scope for me, please? And we'll do a little squatching. You can hang out and check it out for a little while." I was like, "Yeah, I'll check it out." He'd never gone Bigfooting before, never gave it any thought. Came up, brought my night scope. Him and we were looking at the setup, and I said, "Manny set up on the east side of the road, also in the middle of the clear cut, to do the broadcast calls." John was in his car, his little Sebring convertible, driving south, talking to Jeff Rents. And then, so I said, I was looking all around. I said, "Eric," I said, hey, there's a great spot up the hill, just about 70 yards up. There was this big stump, and these were old growth redwoods that had been logged, so the stumps are giant. So I said, that place looks perfect. So we went up on that stump. We're looking around, and then John had the growling going on down below where the trucks were in his car. And we're looking down there, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at the trucks, and there was a big burnt-out black stump, like a big giant redwood stump there. I'm like, how did I not see that giant stump next to our cars? Like, I remember thinking that, like, you know, because we were looking at that for about 10 minutes and nothing. And all of a sudden, that stump stands up and walks into the tree line.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just right there, like right, not more than 25 feet from John, but he couldn't see it because it was really dark night. And I watched it, I was like, oh my God. And I watched it go off on two legs. It definitely was bipedal.
Wow.
And we were watching, and then we heard three, God, I might be messing up the sequence now. It was before or after we saw it. We heard like, but I'm not doing it. It was, I call them grunt growls. Like, it's like a grunt that goes into a growl.
Yeah.
And they do, I mean, bears do it. There's other animals that do it, but it was so loud and so powerful. And I'd heard that 5 nights earlier, but I'm like crazy, and kind of heard all the crazy sounds. I heard that same grunt growl sound, and it sounded the exact same. Like, and seeing how big this thing was,
how big do you think it was?
Well, it walked down, it popped down about 50 yards down. So those pecker poles ran east-west, heading down the hill, and then north-south along the road on the east side of the road, then headed due east down that line. And so we're watching all around, and then I see the thing pop out, and it comes out right where the Hoopa Trail, the coastal trail, the Indian Trail, the footpath. That's where it popped out. It popped out right through the edge of that, and it was kind of bobbing up and down like a giant monkey, you know, like going from one foot to the other and raising its arms up. And Eric and I are passing the scope back going, dude, are you seeing what I'm seeing? He's like, yeah. It just looked like a giant stump with a coconut on top, like its head, but its shoulders were so broad. And then when it would turn sideways and walk, it would walk back and forth to this behind a stump to behind a tree, one of the bigger trees. And we're like, wow. And we stand behind the stump came right between its belly button and its chest.
Wow.
And we're going, well, that's probably a 4-foot stump. And so he's 3 foot taller than that. So he's got to be at least 7 foot, but like 4 foot across the shoulders. Because I saw him when he was by the trucks. His shoulders had to be 4 foot across, 4.5 feet across. And when he turned sideways from the front of his chest to the back of his chest, from the front of his chest to his back, it had to be about 3 foot solid going through that way. I mean,
in depth?
Yeah.
Wow.
It was massive. I mean, this thing, there's no way it weighed less than 1,200 pounds. And I'd honestly guess this thing weighing 1,500, maybe up to 1,700, 1,800.
Wow.
And John found one of its footprints later on, and it was 17 3/4 inches, 9.5 across the ball. And it was sunk into this hard, like our Toyota trucks barely had to scratch, you know, it was hard pan, dried out dirt. And our trucks, like me walking in my logging boots, you know, back when I was probably about 250 or something. And I wasn't even leaving a trace. And this thing, its footprint was pressed in anywhere from 3/4 inch to a 1/4 inch in different spots. So I mean,
and what is your height? You're 6'5", 6'6"?
No. Back then I was about 6'4".
Okay.
And
you're heavy built anyway, weren't you?
Well, I was in way better shape back then. I wasn't so fat. I was like, you know, I was surfing and logging and
that's what I meant by heavy build. Sorry, that I wasn't politely saying fat, but you were quite fit when you were younger as well. I know you're quite slim now, but also tall. But I'm not a tall person. I'm only 5'9", so I'm not a good judge.
I've lost about an inch. I had a bad surfing accident where I fell. I got pitched about the guys on the beach that looked to be probably about 45 feet. I landed on my head with the wave on top of me on a sandbar and impacted my spine and got a little spinal compression fracture and herniated some discs.
That's definitely very harsh. But with this whole thing that you saw, with especially with the when it made its way back out to the Indian trade trail, and with the night scope, you could see this the gesticulating with this monkey-like behavior, this ape-like behavior. What do you think with your study now? What do you think it was trying to do with you guys? Do you think it was like an intimidation? It was like a bluff? It was trying to get rid of you without having to take action, or was this some sort of territorial
I I think
interaction?
I think it was just really agitated and stressed.
Uh-huh.
Because Manny kept blasting the calls, and we had these aggressive gorilla calls playing,
Okay.
and they were like African lowland gorilla aggressive calls, like when they challenge each other, or territorial calls, and this thing was loud. I mean, really loud. And Manny kept hitting, because John said every time I hit my brakes, play the recording again, and I was telling him like, "Hey, stop, stop!" Like it's already here. Don't keep doing it. And it seemed to just agitate it. But it would walk back and forth. And it never dropped down to all fours. It was always on two legs, and then it would go behind a tree, and it had a little laser infrared light. Well, not laser, but just an infrared pen light built into the scope, so you could turn it on and like look at the ground and see better if it was really dark. So every time I flipped on that light, it would go behind this. We thought it was a much smaller tree, but it turned out to be about an 18-inch across, 18-inch diameter tree. But it would stand behind that when I turned on the pen light and pointed it at it, even though the light wasn't illuminating. We were about 120 yards away, even though
but
we weren't.
It never attempted to get any closer to you at any point.
No, but it would stand behind the tree like an ostrich with its head in the ground, because its shoulders stuck out 1.5 feet each side of this tree. But its head, then it would poke its head out. And if the red light was still on, it would stick its head back behind the tree, like we couldn't see it. But the only thing hidden was its head, and like that narrow part in the middle of its body, but with both shoulders and arms hanging out.
Almost childlike, I guess. In the sense of this weird tree peeking thing. I've often wondered a lot about the tree peeking thing and level of intelligence. What do you think about the standard level of intelligence of this species?
See, I've always said I think these things are kind of like idiot savant Jedi ninjas. Like they're so specialized.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not building rockets and suspension bridges and grand architecture. Like, they do what they do. They got their brains, actually, even though their head's giant, their brains probably not as big as ours. And that's from Dr. Meldrum's study of the PG film and some other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And Australopithecus, and seeing like the way their head sits, how it sits so low, and like how it looks like it has no neck. That the brainstem goes up so high into it that it takes up a lot of the room. And then the giant muscles it takes for the jaw and all this, its cranial capacity is probably smaller than ours by maybe a third. So they're smart, but they're smart in a different way. Like their whole life, their whole intelligence is devoted to A, feeding, and B, avoiding humans. Their entire lifestyle is like a moneymaker told me this one, and I think it's a great analogy. Their whole life is spent like a downed fighter pilot behind enemy lines.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
You're always on your toes. They live kind of like almost like a paranoid lifestyle.
Yeah. Evasion at all costs. I've heard lots of stories about examinations of footprint trails where people can actually see that they've walked 5 or 6 paces, then turned to look behind them, and then walked 5 or 6 paces more and turned again. And it seems to be like a repetitive action to constantly check what's behind them as they're moving. Yeah, as they're moving away from wherever they are, and that seems to make a lot of sense to me in regards to why we can't find them. Now, obviously, I know that's an easy get out of jail card to say, well, it's because they're so stealthy and they stay away from us. But something's primarily nocturnal, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but it just stands to reason that you wouldn't see it. Now, most of us aren't out there in the woods at night. The woods aren't lit up. There are no streetlights, are there? So, what's your view on why we can't find them? Do you think it's for lack of scientific effort, or just because of the evasive nature of the animal itself?
I think it's a combination. I mean, if we dedicated the U.S. military to getting us a Bigfoot body, it wouldn't take long. Like it'd be quick, I think. Assuming they're not paranormal.
Yeah.
And which makes me want, I go all over the place, and I'm like, I've had my own weird experiences with that, and it just seems, when you see how big they are, and I've had so many encounters with them. I mean, I haven't had a lot of sightings, but I've had a lot of encounters where I've heard them, and it's just something that big, how it's still undiscovered by science, is just hard to comprehend, really.
It is. It is. But you've got a lot of space there, haven't you? I mean, I flew all around, in many parts of the US when just before we met. I think I was on flight 7 by the time I got to Kentucky in September last year. And one of the things that really impressed me in lots of different places, I didn't expect to be so wild. It was the woodland and the forest and swamps stretching out for ever and ever. And some of these places I visited, I just couldn't see anything but forest on and on and on. And I thought, well, who's out there in the middle of the night with a flashlight? Not many people. A few hunters here and there, but it's easy to tell when hunters are coming, right? They got the flashlights and the guns. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's your living room.
And they stick, and humans stick to trails and roads. They're not. I mean, out like where the PG film was gotten, the Patterson Moon film. You get out in Bluff Creek, out there, Slate Creek, and all that. It is so rugged, and it's just gnarly. I mean, they're not. There's no one out there there's barely anyone out there. Where I got some of my best tips where to go squatching was from when they had this thing called the spotted owl. It was an endangered species, and the government they shut down a bunch of logging, and they had a lot of biologists doing surveys trying to count them and this and that. And they'd have to go out at night with mice and do owl calls. And as you know, Bigfoots use owl calls all the time to communicate with each other. So they'd go out and do owl calls and hike to these remote places and hold up mice on their gloved hand for an owl to come down and take it so they could count them. And those people had quite a few encounters because I think it was the fact they were doing owl calls in like remote locations. And then hunters, you're not allowed to hunt at night unless in California you can't hunt at night at all. But in some parts of the U.S. you can hunt raccoons at night, but out here you can't hunt at night. So there aren't hunters out walking around at night. They'll be walking back to camp after sunset, or they'll be walking in the dark. That's when hunters have almost all their encounters going to the tree stand or back when the low level light conditions. So and there's really not. I mean, there's no one. I mean, it's just us guys with barely any equipment, and just amateurs just out trying to get like that chance shot, which is possible.
That's a thing. And how many of us, right? They're looking. There was a question I wanted to ask you about this actually. In the UK, so that although it's lesser known, there's lots of British Bigfoot sightings. Nothing like North America, but in the hundreds anyway. Over about 40 years or so, they've been collected. Now, what I noticed about 98% of these sightings, as a rough figure, is nearly all of them were accidental, and they were seen by people who weren't looking for Bigfoot, didn't know about it. They were either driving somewhere, or they were walking their dog, or taking a little stroll through the woods, and they saw something. Only 2%, as a rough estimate, were people who were out there looking for something like Bigfoot and thought that they saw it. Do you think does that exist in North America as well, that phenomena of the accidental witness? And if it does, do you think it's because searching looks like hunting, and that drives these animals away from you?
Well, even out here with all the people looking for Bigfoot, 99.99% of all sightings are still accidental. I mean, Bigfooters rarely see them. I mean, and I'm suspicious of the guys that see. I mean, I've been out in the field for 30 years, and I've gotten 6 glimpses, and I got one daylight glimpse for literally less than a half second, and then I've had nighttime visuals, which gives me hope though, because I know with the good equipment that it's possible to get the footage. I mean, we've been right on top of them. I mean, Clip and I have had a couple of times where if we had good therm, it'd be a case closed video, you know. And one time I was with Bart, and we had a really junky first gen therm, you know, like 120 by 180 or 120 by 160 resolution. And the thing was a couple hundred yards away, and and we didn't have a recorder. Didn't even have a recorder built into it. We watched that thing, and with the stuff we have now, that would, you know, that thing was about 9 foot. We would have had great footage. I mean, there's been several times. Yeah, there's been several times I could have got great. But that's over 30 years, you know, a handful of times.
Yeah, I'm and what do you think? I mean, you must have been asked this before quite a few times, but what do you think of the you know, the Red Circle tribe of
Oh
yeah, Squatches out there?
I don't pay attention to it too much. I mean, if there's more than one, especially, I mean,
yeah.
And we have a guy that does analysis for us on that stuff, and almost every time, and he's looked at lots of them. Every time it's vegetation.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, pareidolia, right? I mean, it's
yeah.
So cool. I was so fed up receiving these pictures at one point about a year and a half ago. I was taking a walk along the Thames where it was very sort of woody and sort of you know, there were no houses around or anything, and I just took a picture of there was a shot of the Thames, and there was some lovely trees and forest on the other side. And I put some red circles on it, and I said, in this picture, a lake monster submerged, 2 dog men, and a juvenile Bigfoot. And the amount of people that said that they could see it was quite disturbing.
Right.
And it was just a snap. It was for a joke. It was like to make a point, like, you know, this is ridiculous. And some people then wrote in and said, well, look, Andy, you know, we're a bit concerned that you're posting pictures like this. I thought it was a serious thing. I said, look, I should have qualified more. This is a joke. I'm saying, come on, let's be serious. We can't. Jeff Meldrum, actually, when I saw him speak at last year's International Cryptozoology Conference, we had a little chat at dinner afterwards. What he said in his 50 Years of Paddy speech was, this is disputed, even though it's never been disproven, it's disputed. And any evidence that's less than this is no evidence at all.
Right.
Because if that's the quality that you can dispute, you know, making out a bit of a face in the bush is nothing at all. You know, we can't. It's inadmissible, they'd say. And that's my feeling on it. Just quickly, you know, you've had a few nerve-wracking encounters out there in the forest, in the woods. Would you consider these animals inherently dangerous, or do you think it's just like a bear or anything else, or a gorilla? You know, if you meet the right individual at the wrong time, and that's the you'd have that issue.
I think they're much more dangerous than gorillas. I think they're more probably on par with chimpanzees, or maybe not that dangerous, somewhere between gorilla and chimp. Because I think if they're really, really after you, you got no, I don't care if you got what gun you got. If they want you, you're just gone. Well, I don't know how you feel about this stuff. People call it the woo. And
yeah.
I totally state from the get-go that it could be a totally natural phenomenon, like your own brain causing this. You know, like I had a couple scientists tell me, well, your brain could make you think you're hearing a voice in your head, because if you were around a Bigfoot and it released a pheromone, and we've evolved next to these things, and that pheromone means like grave danger to us, like it's inherently in us, that your brain might put words in your head like "get out of here" or something like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But
they have that with the big grey man of Ben McDwee. People feel like they've been told to jump off the mountain and things like that.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I definitely heard when I had that encounter that first scary night, 5 nights before my first sighting, when the thing came up behind me in the bushes and started growling. This is when makes me think they have infrasound, but it could totally be the pheromone thing or just my fear of how deep the growl was. but I think it has some kind of infrasound something. But I was so scared. I was like, don't be you can't be a pussy now. You got to turn around and take its picture. Because I had a disposable camera. I'm like, all right, Bubs, you're going to turn around and snap its picture, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And as soon as I picked up the camera, and I was pushing the flash button, it was a disposable like cardboard one, 35 millimeter. And just as I was getting ready to turn around, I heard very clear voice in my head say, "If you turn around and try to take my picture, I'm going to kill you, and no one's ever going to find your body."
Wow. Was it as clear as crystal, just like a voice?
Dude, yeah. And I had that happen 2 other times, 3 other times. Yeah, once was funny enough, I was in Tom Powell's backyard, sleeping out on the grass with Cliff. This is before the show started. And, Tom Powell's the big king of the woo for Bigfoot stuff, basically paranormal aspects, which he very well could be completely right, but I heard one that night. We went out and I was doing my antagonizing, like my aggressive gorilla grunting, like territorial call. I was doing that. And we went back to Tom's house about 3 a.m. after hiking around this like 6-mile loop that he'd do at night. And about 100 yards down in the tree line, coming up the back of from his neighbor's property, I heard a big snap, like an intentional branch break, and all the hair on my body went up, and I knew what it was. And then about a minute later, about 50 yards down, was another big snap. I mean, it was loud. I couldn't believe the neighbors didn't get woken up, because they're only small 5-acre pieces, 5-acre parcels. And then about 30 seconds after that, or a minute after that, whatever it was, there was a huge crack right behind us, directly behind us in the tree line. And right then I got this loud voice in my head, "We're here." And I even had like a visual image of 3 Bigfoots in the woods. And I didn't hear about this till years later, but a couple of times I had like those voices. It sounds so nuts. When I had like the voice in my head, it kind of, a few of the times there was like a mental image came with it of who was sending the message. Which is totally, I'm not saying like Bigfoots were telepathically talking to me. They might have, but they may have been, but it's also very likely that it could have just been my brain causing,
I think it's very possible. I mean, I was talking to somebody about the woo thing here, and I always default to sort of to natural biological phenomena first. So infrasound, we know that tigers use that to stun their prey sometimes before they pounce, and this immobility that they have, some people have attributed that obviously to Bigfoot as well. And there's been tales, I know the Yowie hunters, Dean and Paul Harrison over there, they had some Aboriginal witness on one of their shows one time. They do that great podcast, where people call in with their sightings, or they interview people, a very police questioning kind of style. And this Aboriginal guy who was out with his uncle and father was talking about seeing some deer down in the corral, sort of running around in circles, being very panicked. And suddenly all 3 of them felt really terrified. And then they saw this Bigfoot, this Yowie. And it wasn't commented upon in the show, but immediately to me, I thought perhaps this is that infrasound effect. It moves your organs around, it gives you this sense of fear. And then perhaps whatever then we envisage or we imagine after that is what the voice is, because your instincts say, "Bobo, get out of here." And
right.
That's the effect of what this sound is doing to your body. I've not had any real things I would class as experiences in this search, but it did have something strange happen to me when I was walking up the Altna Creek I told Cliff about this too, in Scotland recently when I was in Loch Ness. And I'd been up there for about 3 hours, and I was coming down, and I was about an hour walk back down, and there was nobody around because it was January, and there were 2 push trees over the path on the way up. But I knew there'd been high winds, the the day before. So I thought, well, there you go, high winds. And as I was walking back down, I was photographing these waterfalls and things. I was almost certain for a second that I saw like a humanoid figure about 100 feet away up the hill, dark behind a tree. But it was one of those corner of the eye things, just like a millisecond. I thought, well, you can't, that's not anything. That's just you looking up suddenly. But something made me think, look up now. And I did. And after that, I had this deep set fear that you've got to get out of the forest. And I knew there was a big dark pit to walk through. And all the way down, I was telling myself, you're a guy up in the hills looking for monsters, and now you've had, like a corner of the eye sighting, and you're freaking yourself out. This is all that is happening here. But even though I rationalized it, the fear that I must move away from here and get out of this section, that was very real until I came into this. It wasn't a clearing, but it was like a different type of tree, and I knew I was only half an hour away, and then it just dropped away out of nowhere. And that, to me, I always have to weigh that up. Well, especially with foreknowledge, as your ex-colleague Renee would say, Bigfoot on the brain. Is that something that I've made myself feel because I know the genre, or is it something that happened to me against my best efforts to stay calm? So it's interesting. Don't really know how to classify it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many things that were. That's why, like, when I had my only daylight glimpse, if Monkey hadn't been so alerted to it, because it was just there and gone, it was so fast. Like I've had. I mean, we've all had things like that where, like, you catch a glimpse out, like you're turning your head, you catch a glimpse of a flash or something, and so I always discount that. Like I never, because I've had it happen so many times.
Same, yeah. Same.
And then, but this time when it happened, I walked over, there was this huge stink where the thing had been standing. I mean, like eye burning, and then I tracked it up where it went, and I could hear it climbing up this cliff, and there was stuff rolling down. But if I didn't smell it, and then find this giant Bigfoot path up, and that was the thing about it, was where I saw it, I'd walked that old decommissioned logging road so many times, and always looked down into the creek on the left, because that's where, and then on the right it was just a thin strip of trees and brush, and then a dirt cliff that went up to the road above. And I just never even looked to that side, because there's not, it's just some bushes and trees, like for about 30 feet, and then you go to the cliff base, and the thing there had been a 4 foot wide, like 9 foot tall trail right there that was obviously years old, that came down, and that's where it went up, right there. And I'd never even noticed that thing before, and it was right there in plain sight. And no one else, and my other Bigfoot buddies around there had never noticed it either until I pointed it out to them. They're like, "Oh my God, it was right in front of us the whole time." And it was where they could come down, where that trail came down, they could come down and spy on our campground from, a couple hundred yards away, and keep an eye on everything, and then disappear right back up, and no one even looked over there.
I guess it's interesting. You had to see that movement. You had to follow that path of the creature to see it. I was, you've got a lot of experience in this area. For me, really, I've only been, as I mockingly call it, a career cryptozoologist for the last 3 years. I basically decided to write a book and took it too seriously. That's what my wife says. And I was just working in London before that, doing the whole thing. So I think with these things, I always think the same thing about game cams too, and trails and whatnot. The forest, the woods, it's their backyard, it's their living room. It's their living room. So if you come in and you change something, it's noticeable to them. That's why they see the game cams. Because if you come into my house and you change one book on the shelf, they may all be books, but I notice that one of them is different because it's my house, right?
Right.
So I think it's the same for them. Same with trails, things that seem obvious to a creature like that, I think would seem quite hidden to us too. Now, this question I asked everybody, by the way. Moving on. If money was no object, and you could go anywhere you wanted, what cryptid would you like to look for? In what location? And what two researchers would you take with you? It can be anybody, living or dead.
And this is like unlimited budget.
Unlimited budget. any location in the world, encrypted, any two researchers to go with you from, past and present?
I would go to, well, there's a few places. I mean, how long do I have?
You can stay there for as long as you like. But
can I move around?
Sure.
I would do 2 weeks. 2 weeks down the Amazon, where we found a place about 1,100 miles up the Amazon, where the Mapinguari, the Bigfoot one, because it seems like there's two things there: Mapinguari and Mapinguari. One, they get even the locals mix them up and kind of mishmash them together. But it seems that there's like a giant sloth, ground sloth, that's still living down in there, and then also like a Bigfoot type, bipedal hominid. And they see it 1 week either side of the summer and winter solstices, so in January and December. And it's seen for a couple nights. It comes down and roars and screams and walks back and forth on this ridge. So I would do that for those 2 weeks. Then I would go back to Nepal, to where I heard the one vocalizing when the rainstorm hit.
Wow.
I'd go to that spot, and then for North American Bigfoot, there's I would try to find the best habituation site, like where there's total repeat activity, and not really probably somewhere in the Pacific Northwest where it's just such thick, that preferably be a good wintertime spot that has, like where they're visiting a farmhouse, whatever, like, or, has something that has a lot of outbuildings and a lot of animals and barns and pens where because they can detect the electronics. So there's got to be pre-existing electronics. I mean, because people see them walking around like power lines all the time. It's like, they're used to being around electrical fields and that sort of stuff. But you're bringing up the game cam, like how that doesn't seem so effective with the Bigfoots.
Yeah.
And Cliff and I have a podcast coming out probably next month that we're going to start releasing it. We've been working on it, and you're going to be on it here pretty soon.
Yeah, I hope so. I'd love to do that.
Well, we just had a potentially big breakthrough in. We're waiting to talk to the guy now. He works for the Department of Defense, but it's about game cameras and how animals sense them. And this guy's theories on it, and I think it's going to really have a huge impact on Bigfoot research. But anyways, yeah, putting cameras out. I think I've said this for years and years and years. Find a spot like that. Have very small cameras, little tiny spy cameras stuck in a few different, like all over the place. And just lay low. Don't even turn them on for a while. Like, get them put in, but I wouldn't even. I'd let them sit for a while, like months and months.
Habituated. Yeah.
Yeah, and then turn them on. But I'd find a great habituation spot and somewhere it's not like Washington and Olympic Peninsula where I'd love to go, but it's just a wall-to-wall rainforest jungle. You can't see 10 feet into the brush. I'd be looking somewhere like East Washington, East Oregon, out in the high desert. Or a great spot's the Four Corners, or up in like that Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky area in the wintertime when all those deciduous trees have lost their leaves. And it's a lot more bleak. And then also, you're not dealing with all these, in the summertime, you're dealing with glowing hot objects like rocks and stumps and decaying stumps that, look like animals that are glowing so hot. You see. If there's rocks exposed in the summer, you just see they'll have to.
They retain the heat for hours afterwards, after nightfall.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah. So I'd want a wintertime spot that's not heavily wooded, like maybe like in the Dakotas with the Sioux tribes. Yeah, I'd do something like that.
Because they come right up to towns, right?
Oh yeah, especially the natives, especially the Indian communities.
Why do you think that is, actually? I know we've got to finish up soon, but there does seem to be a phenomenon of them not being more of these, but at least being more free about the way they move about in some of the First Nations areas. Well, why do you think that is?
Because a lot of the tribes won't shoot at them.
Uh-huh.
That's part of it. I think that's a huge part of it, and they've just always been there.
Yeah.
And I think it's the fact that, but there's other tribes that'll shoot at them all. Like the Apaches will try to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the tribes up north, they'll shoot at them. They'll take shots at them. So I think, and that's just why they're seen in national parks too.
Yeah.
There's no hunting in there.
So I'm guessing it's just about their local areas that they're used to being free to move around, and it's experience, probably
Right.
passed down in some way. And finally, we do have to go, but the end of Finding Bigfoot, sadly missed. And I know you did your time with that, and it was great for what it was. Apart from the podcast, which I'm really looking forward to listening to with you and Cliff, are there any other TV projects coming up that we can look out for?
Nothing. And I'm talking to a few different people about different stuff. One's like is cryptozoology stuff all the way around, and they deal with shapeshifters a lot and forms they take. Like we'd be dealing with Dogman, and there'd be some Sasquatch. It'd be a kind of a mix of stuff. It seems that just straight Moneymaker's got a straight Bigfoot show going to be coming out. He's going to announce that next month, which I'm excited about that one. His is going to be great. They're going to be using new high-end drones with thermal imagers. Yeah, that's great. See, I think you're talking about having this imaginary budget of unlimited resources.
Yes,
I'd have a drone fleet.
Yeah,
I'd be going. I'd have the vehicles with the R2D2 units on top, where those pan, tilt, rotating cameras.
Oh yeah.
I'd have guys out on foot with handheld thermals. But I think
everything.
Yeah, I'd go all out, and you'd get them. I think you really could, because I've seen them, and if I had the right equipment, I could have filmed them. So I know a lot of people think it's a waste of time trying to film them. They're like, oh, they're paranormal, you're not going to film. Like, I don't agree with that. I think we're going to get them on film, because I've seen them on thermal imager. I know what they look like on thermal.
I always make this comment about the Kraken. When you go to a museum these days and you see a giant squid in formaldehyde somewhere, that was the Kraken for thousands of years. And
right.
Here it is, 20, 30, 40 feet long in your museum, and you walk past and go, oh, Kraken, right? Maybe Bigfoot will be like that in the future, or, lake monsters, or whatever we end up finding. We have found some large animals. We found the okapi. That was not so long back, not really.
Right.
And that's a pretty big creature to be missing, for all this time. And that was something we knew nothing about. It was ethno known, but it wasn't some lost creature like perhaps some of the lake monsters may be, or some creature we've never truly discovered. Like, my money's more on the Gigantopithecus theory. I know other people have other theories. I'm not an expert on that side of things. I think it's all out there, and it's just the fact that no true scientific study has been applied to it, as we would to any other acknowledged species that we were looking for. And I think it would be great to get that kind of support at some point in the future. But well, I'm gonna jump off here. It's been awesome to have you on and pick your brain about all of the things I wanted to know for this time, and I hope people have enjoyed it too. And where's the best place to find you? If people want to find you online and look at what you're doing, where can they go?
On Facebook, James BOBO FAY _ Finding Bigfoot. And then also I'm at Squatcher on Twitter, but I don't do that too much.
Well, that sounds absolutely awesome. I advise everybody listening to go and find Bobo there and follow and like and get involved in the podcast when it comes out, because I think that's going to be absolutely awesome. And thank you for coming on the show.
I wish I was more coherent for you, Andy, but thanks for having me.
Well, you were very coherent, and thanks for making your way through my mumbly, sort of stumbly English accent as well. You know, you did pretty well with it.
Right on, man.
See you
Okay,
soon,
well, we'll
buddy.
see. Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye.